Hey everyone, Isabelle Fox here, and today I'm going to share with you exactly what I said to my boyfriend when I revealed to him I was an escort, which was on only our second date. I've actually been working on this video for over a week. I've just been moving apartments, so I'm sitting here recording this in my new apartment, which is really exciting. And this was an important one to share because the personal aspect of sex work is just a whole other beast in itself, aside from all the business stuff that we usually talk about. I've been with my current boyfriend for 2 years, and I've had multiple relationships while being a professional escort, and I've been honest with all my partners about what I do. And it's something that I get asked about really frequently, especially with girls that I work with when they're entering into new relationships or starting to date. And it's a really tricky thing to learn how to navigate when you're new and you don't have any experience in this area. So let's get into exactly how I handled this situation and what I learned from it that might be able to help you as well. So let me give you a little bit of background info on myself so that you can understand the context, which will be different for everybody as to how they handle each situation. Firstly, escorting is and was 2 years ago when I told my current partner my full-time profession. So that plays a part in how somebody will probably respond to what you do and also to how you're going to present it to them. I've personally constructed the network of people in my life to be open-minded and supportive of what I do. Although there are many acquaintances who I am not close with who don't know what I do. So I only selectively choose to share with the people who I consider to be close to me that I am a sex worker. I don't openly live my life as a sex worker. But that being said, I'm not like some people who have nobody who knows, so they have to be very careful about who they tell because it's such a closely guarded secret. For me, and this is a little bit further down, aside from some people in my family, and they are some important people as well, they're not just, distant cousins I never talk to, most people in my inner circle of life know what I do. So it's not as risky for me if I tell a close partner that they're then going to go and tell my best friend who I've been friends with for 10 years and I don't want them to know. I'm not publicly an escort. I do blow my face, and my privacy is very important to me. So while I feel comfortable with these people knowing, I actively choose to not have my profession just be known publicly, and I wouldn't want to just be walking around having people know what I do. Not at this time in my life anyway. I've also never lied to a partner about working, and I've always sought out relationship with those who I can be my true, authentic self with. Though I will tell you that this has come at a cost and has definitely not always been easy. So everything you do in life has benefits and negatives. And I want to be clear that even though this has been for me the only path and the best way, it has certainly been challenging along the way. And I haven't met anybody who has made this choice who hasn't found it challenging at times too. So be aware of that. So specifically to my partner, we met on Tinder, and I originally told him the cover story profession I have that is very well constructed and believable. So when I told him what I do, there was no doubt in his mind that I did something that was totally normal and something else. So he didn't even have any sort of lingering suspicion. It was literally like a bucket of water, cold water in the face. He had no clue. I'd spoken with him and gotten to know him relatively well in a short amount of time, well enough to judge his character. So we were speaking for a period of time on Tinder because we actually lived in separate cities, and we had spoken over the phone and we'd done a lot of texting. So I had had time to at least get a sense of what his sense of character was like. And then we'd had one date where I got to know him even more. And then at the end of our second date, I had decided that I was ready to tell him. I was looking for a serious relationship, and I knew that he was open to one as well, although I'm not saying that just because I was talking to him that I necessarily wanted that to be with him. I just know myself, and I know that if I'm going to continue seeing somebody, it's probably going to be because I want a relationship with them. I had subtly brought up sex work during conversation in an appropriate manner, and he had not responded adversely to the topic. I really recommend doing this initially when you're talking to somebody and you haven't decided to tell them yet. It's a good idea, to get some kind of understanding of where they may sit and where their perspective might be on this topic. You might mention sex work and get a totally negative response from somebody who otherwise seems really rational and normal and open-minded. You just can't always judge this particular topic. kind of like religion. You might be talking to somebody and then you touch on religion and you see a side of them that you didn't entirely expect. And that's totally fine. It's just good to be armed with knowledge in this situation. So I brought it up just casually. I think I brought it up as a joke or something like that. And he didn't respond to be super negative about it. He kind of made a joke in return, but was like calm and positive about the topic. He didn't seem that he had this huge hang up about it. And that's what I was really trying to get some sort of look into. And like I said, I knew his character a bit by this point, and I knew that in terms of a concept that he would probably be open-minded to it. If I had brought it up as an academic concept and said, hi, what do you think of sex work? He probably would have said, oh, that seems like a profession to me, and we could have had a conversation about it without him freaking out and saying that it was disgusting or it was wrong or anything silly like that. So we had 2 dates and we'd spend about 4 to 5 hours together on these dates. They were long dates. We really got along. We had really great chemistry, so that's why they were longer. And by the time I decided to tell him, I knew that I liked him enough to continue seeing him, but I hadn't definitively decided that I wanted to be with him seriously, and I definitely wasn't too emotionally attached to him. So what I mean by that is that I knew that if at the end of the second date we never saw each other again, that would be sweet with me. Like, I wasn't going to be laying up at night crying over this guy or upset at all the shared moments that we had had. I knew that I liked him, I knew we had chemistry, and that was about it. I didn't see myself as marrying this man or feel very committed to that idea at this time, though I was open to it. So it gives you a bit of context as to where things sat, which is important when we go on and I explain to you what I did, how he responded, how he thought, and how we handled it. So I told him at the end of our second date, we were totally alone and it was very private, and this is exactly how I opened the conversation. I said to him, I have something to share with you about me, and it's really positive because I want you to really be able to know me, and I like to spend time with people I can be myself with and who can be themselves with me. I hope you can understand why I choose to take my time sharing this with you, as it's very important and as it's very private, and I wanted to wait to be sure that you're the trustworthy person I know you to be before telling you, as it's very important to me that it remains private regardless of how you feel about it. I am a professional escort. I had worked in and out of the sex industry for a number of years before deciding that I wanted to do this full-time and professionally, and to use it as a means to help me really make something of my life and to achieve things that really matter to me. I feel really positive about what I do, and for me it is a job or profession like any other. I don't plan on doing it forever, and I have planned my next steps, though for now this is what I am doing. I totally understand if that is something you don't want to be a part of, as it isn't for everyone. I'm happy to talk about it and answer any questions you may have, and if you prefer that we end things here, that's totally fine. Now, before I go on to his response, I just want to go back and touch on some of the things that were important that I said. Now, I want you to know, guys, that I actually sat down and planned this conversation, and I rehearsed it with someone close in my life, and I had done this with another guy before, so I had already had like the rip off the band-aid first experience. It was daunting and I was nervous saying it all, but I had practiced and I was confident and sure of what I was going to do. And like I said, I wasn't attached to the end result. In my mind, I thought, you know what, this is a bit of an experiment. If he's not cool with it, then that's fine. We can move on. He's not right for me. So I recommend that you plan what you're going to say. You don't just blurt it out, because you don't want to say things that come across the wrong way. And you want to be selective in how you choose to word this coming out. So I started it by telling him that it was really positive. If you tell somebody, I've got something to share with you, especially someone who doesn't know you very well, or if you say, well, I've got something I have to tell you, they're probably going to immediately be worried that it's something bad. You want to wipe that thought from their mind, and you want them to know up front, this is actually really positive for us because we can get to know each other better. And they're immediately going to be like, oh, great, this is positive. I then went on to explain immediately why I hadn't told him sooner, and to stress the fact that I thought that he was a trustworthy person and that it needed to remain private regardless of how he felt about it. Now, in his emotionalized state, once you tell him all this, he might not remember exactly what you've said, but it's still important that you say it because you can reference it later, and he will still hear it. Then I referred to what I do as a professional escort. That is always how I have seen it. I don't personally use any other term. Sometimes I use the word sex worker, but especially when I'm telling somebody for the first time, this is how I see it in my mind, is I'm a professional woman, a professional business person in the profession of escorting, and I want them to know and to see it in that same way as well. So I don't say any of the other terms like hooker, prostitute, anything else, and not because I think that they're negative terms, because I think that words only have meaning that you give them, but unfortunately society has given a lot of these words negative stigma. You don't want to open the conversation with somebody using a term that is negatively stigmatized. It's not helpful for you. Aside from the fact that the word is unfair, it's not relevant at this time, you just want to give the most positive and helpful message for you in getting the result that you want. Now, I personally chose to give my partner a bit of back info. I suggest that you do the same so that they can kind of get a picture of where you are and what you're doing. And I chose to share with him that I wouldn't be doing this forever and that I had other things in store. But I also made it very clear that I felt positive about it, that for me it's just a job and that I'm doing this right now. I don't make any hint in here of, oh, if you don't like it or anything like that. At no time was I suggesting that I would ever stop for him, because for me that wasn't an option. I've been down that path before, I'm not going to do it again, and I certainly didn't want to open the conversation with any sort of hesitancy that that was up for discussion, because it wasn't. I wanted to make it really clear that by continuing with me, you accept that this is what I'm doing at the moment. And I went on with him later and we talked about my plan, which we won't get into now, but I wanted to make that clear for him. So I suggest that you do the same if that's where you're at. I also ended it by telling him that it was totally understandable if he didn't want to be involved, which it is. It is his right and his choice to decide if he wants to be involved with you, just as it is your right and your choice to decide what you want to be involved with in your life. So I didn't want to make him feel pressured or judged. I didn't want to make him feel like I was going to hate on him if he decided not to continue to see me, because I wasn't going to, because that's not fair. And also that paints me in an even better light, because you want to take the pressure off from him. You don't want him thinking about this issue and then also thinking about how you're going to react or what you're going to think of him. That's just not helpful to you. You want to try and simplify the process. So that's exactly what I said, and that is why I said it. And I practiced it, so I recommend that if you're going to do this, that you practice your speech too, and practice it with somebody that you trust, practice it in front of the mirror, write it down. That will be really useful. The first time I did it, I didn't really practice and it did not go as smoothly. Now, this is his response. I initially tell people just try putting yourself in his shoes for a moment so you understand what is going to happen now a little better. And remember too that while this was my partner's, this time his response, everybody will respond differently. The guy who I saw a few people before him, who I had to sit down and have the same conversation with, he had a very different reaction based on his experiences too. So even though I'm sharing this with you, don't assume that this is how it might go for you. Now, while I was talking my speech, because it was a bit of a monologue, he was quiet and he was listening intently, though I could tell that he was obviously trying to remain polite. So the second I said what I said, the term professional escort, I could see that his face changed to be, I'm not really sure what word to use, not uncomfortable, but to be shocked. But to also, I could see clearly that he was trying not to show that he was shocked, because we were still new to each other, so he clearly didn't want to be polite. So once I stopped talking, I could tell he was really taken aback and shocked, and when I had finished speaking, I had to sit patiently and try myself to not react too strongly or to preempt his response, because I needed to give him time to wrap his mind around what I said. So I didn't say anything until he said something. I just sat there calmly and let him kind of struggle with his own words. And I didn't immediately jump in my mind to the thought that he was going to think badly of what I had said, or that he was going to say, no, we can't see each other, or even the opposite, that he was going to be over the moon and super supportive. I just tried to remain really neutral and just tried to remember that I need to give him time to tell me what he thinks and not assume that I know what he thinks. So at first he thought I was joking. That was literally the first thing that he said. He said, are you joking? And I assured him that I wasn't, and then he could tell that I was very serious, and then he was quiet again for a while. And once he was quiet after a little while, the questions began. So I'm going to list for you all the things that he asked me, and we talked about it for quite a while. I can't remember, it must have been a couple hours. And in my experience, these are the common questions that will arise. And regardless of whether or not you think it's fair, you should be prepared to answer these things if you want a positive result, and you should probably think beforehand of how you're going to answer them. So he will want to clarify exactly what you mean by escort, or any other alternative title you have used. So I answered honestly that I exchanged full sex for money. Now the term escort actually is different for some people. The first time I heard the word escort, I thought that it was a social thing where you went out and spent time with people socially. So he may need some clarification on exactly what you mean. I suggest you be honest. He will want to know exactly what spectrum of services you offer, and I answered honestly. He will ask about the health precautions you take and what protection you use. I answered honestly, and I also told him that I provide natural oral, and I offered to tell him the medical reasons behind why I thought that was relatively risk-free. So when I started offering natural services like natural oral, which is really all it is, I actually went to 3 doctors and got their medical opinion with the risks associated, and then decided for myself that I was comfortable taking those risks because I thought they were very low. So I suggest that if you're doing anything natural, that you have educated that too, because knowledge is power, and he will want to know that information, and it's better if you can just tell him. Otherwise he'll go and figure it out for himself, or maybe he'll make his own conclusions that aren't medically based, which isn't helpful and will generally be worse than what it is. He will ask if you're regularly tested, and he will possibly ask if you have ever had anything. I answered honestly. I told him that we are required by law to be tested every 3 months, but that I get tested more regularly. I suggest you just tell him your background. I hadn't had anything, so I was honest about that. And I was also honest in telling him that I thought that most people who weren't sex workers had a higher chance of contracting something because they tended not to be as sexually educated. That was just a handy little drop in. You obviously don't have to share that, but it is true. He will ask you why you do this, and he will probably do it with the implication of trying to understand why you don't do something else instead. My partner especially thought to seem that I was highly educated and intelligent, and thought that my previous job that I had told him that I did, which was something I actually did used to do, he couldn't really understand why I wouldn't just continue doing that and why I would choose this path. That's an understandable question and a fair one given the nature of the job. And I suggest that you have a response for this. Even if the response isn't a great one, at least show him that you've thought about it, because he's going to ask you. And if he asks you and you don't have anything to say, he will make assumptions that might not be accurate and might not be really very good for you. So I had a very well thought out response to this because I know very clearly what I'm here to achieve. So I shared that with him, and I didn't make any justifications for why those things were important to me at that time. I just told him that this is what I wanted to do and this is why I was doing it, and that was enough because I had a lot of confidence in that. He will ask you how long you intend on doing this for. So you understand why he's preempting how long you may be involved with this for, and also if you are likely to be a lifer. Now I want to tell you that at this time I actually thought that I had a certain period of time in the industry that turned out to not be accurate. So when you're saying this to whoever you're talking to, I suggest that you say it with a disclaimer that I can't entirely know what's going to happen in life. When I first met my partner, this is 2 years ago, I thought that I would only be escorting based on the current plan for 6 to 12 months. Now that was not the case. After 12 months, I was still working, and it just taught me that I shouldn't really make those sorts of statements. Even if you think you know, you can't always entirely be sure. And my partner at the time, one of the key reasons I think he was more open-minded to moving forward with me was because he thought in the grand scheme of things that a year was very short, which it is. And he thought he'd kind of be able to get through it in a year. Now we had to overcome that at the year mark because I realized that I had said something, even though I totally meant it at the time, I couldn't guarantee that. You can't know what's going to happen in your life. So in hindsight, if I've learned something from this, I wish that I had never said that. I wish that I had told him my plan, but also said to him, I can't be totally certain of this plan, and if it doesn't go according to plan, I'm going to continue what I'm doing now, regardless of how you feel about it. Which was the truth. I've left work for partners before, or not left, but taken time off, and I've always regretted it for my own reasons, and I had decided I probably wouldn't do that again. So I wish I'd been more clear about the time frame. So that's just a little personal note. I suggest that you give that some thought before you quote timeframes. But definitely if you have a time in mind, it's good that you tell them that. Otherwise they might just think that you have no plan at all, that you're just here doing this because you're lazy, you're slack, and that there's never going to be an end date, and that if they're going to marry you, you're still going to be doing it, which you might be, and if you are, that's fine, be honest about it. But he needs to know that information so he can decide how he feels about it. He will ask if you have dated clients. I have, so I told him yes, and I explained some of the circumstances around it when he asked, so he didn't get to it straight away. He will ask how many people know and how open you are about what you do. So you need to know that there are many implications outside of your immediate relationship with this person that he needs to consider. For instance, if you are a full-face escort, that's something that he's going to have to decide how he handles, because it might mean that you're out in public and that somebody recognizes you, a client sees you, somebody who isn't a client, and he has to know that that is going to be more likely. The more people you choose to tell, the more a network there is for him to wrap his mind around. So for me, it was my close friends, some of my family. I wasn't totally open about it, but I certainly wasn't sitting in a corner putting it into my, deepest, darkest closet. I was comfortable with what I did, and he had to wrap his mind around the fact that he would meet people who would know that he was with me as a sex worker, and that they would know that he was dating me, and there's all these different implications that they need to wrap their mind around, so it's better that you're honest about that. And following that, he may ask if you want him to tell other people too, or if he can. So the first guy that I told, he asked me how I felt about this because he initially decided that he didn't want to tell other people. And there was a myriad of reasons behind that, mostly because he didn't want them to judge me before they had gotten to know me. But there are, of course, other ones associated with that as well. Now, how you handle this part, this follow-up after you've told him, is really important. And it will contribute greatly toward how he sees you as an escort or sex worker, like how he sees you within the profession, and also how he sees you as someone he may continue to date, because he's going to have to wrap his mind around both of those concepts. Depending on him and his experiences and what he thinks of certain things, after you tell him this information, he's going to have to reevaluate that stuff. So just be patient and be calm, and remember that this is normal and a product of our society's stigma, and you need to go through this to have hope at moving forward positively. So just know that this is not an attack on you, and don't respond as if it is. This is a product of our society, and that's just the way it is right now, so just be calm about that as much as you can be. Now, why I want to recommend at this time that you tell them sooner rather than later. I stress how important it was that I told him on only our second date, and we'd already been talking for a couple of weeks, probably like 2 weeks at this stage, quite a lot as well. So we'd really, gone back and forth. It's not like we'd had a few texts and then we just met. So I'm not saying tell them the first sentence that you speak with them. You have to, based on your own situation. I can't give specific advice in this one video. I would have to know your specific circumstance to kind of tell you what I would recommend, in my opinion, you should do. But I don't suggest you just message them off the cuff and tell them straight up in your first conversation. I suggest you do a little bit of digging to see what their character is like, to see if you even want to see them more than once, because if you don't, then it's a waste of your time. Don't bother. But here is basically my explanation to you of why I think you should do it sooner rather than later. Now, I know that most girls think, and this is what I hear all the time, I'm going to wait to tell him for when I'm certain about how I feel, just to make sure it's worth it. That's the first biggest one. Oh, we've been going out for a couple months, but I'm not totally certain yet. Well, if you've been seeing them more than once, more than twice, you know that you're interested enough to continue seeing them. And if it's going to be in any sort of serious capacity, that isn't going to be helpful to you. Also, I want to make sure that he really likes me and knows me outside the job before I tell him, because then I think he'll be more likely to stay with me. That's a huge one. That, I don't want him to immediately think that I'm just a sex worker, I'm just this, or think badly of me and then leave. If he's already in love with me or he already cares about me, he'll be more willing to work through it. Now guys, this way it lies total madness. And let me explain to you why. If you choose to wait, firstly for yourself, if you choose to wait till you're sure because you like him enough, you will be way too colored by your own emotions, and you will be more prone to lie or twist the truth. You'll feel even more anxious because you care far too much about his response, about whether he will or won't stay with you. And you will also have way more lies to unpick for him, which will completely destroy the trust you need to recultivate with this person to move forward. So I'll get into this shortly, but even after 2 dates and only 2 weeks of talking, there was a certain amount of betrayal that my partner felt, even though it was minimal and even though it was quite easily handled. It was still present, and we still had to overcome that, and we had to rebuild what little trust we had already built, enough to the point that I had felt that I trusted him enough to at least tell him. So you can see that there was trust there. There was still a form of a relationship. So if you wait, that trust is going to be even more damaged, because you now have all these other lies that you have to unpick. Where were you at this time? How did you afford that? When you saw me, had you just seen a client beforehand? All these other things that are now going to come up that he has to handle in a state that he feels betrayed. Secondly, you're going to care a lot more about how he responds. So you're going to feel even more anxious and nervous to do something that is already anxiety-inducing and nerve-wracking anyway. Even this guy who I didn't really know that well and who I didn't really care if he said, oh, look, I don't want to see you anymore, that would have been fine by me. I still felt nervous saying it, because it is a daunting thing to reveal to somebody who you don't know very well, especially somebody that you're considering moving forward with. And lastly, because you care so much about what he thinks, you're going to be more likely, when he says, what services do you offer, you're going to lie. When he says to you, can I see your profile? You're going to go and quickly edit your profile so that he can't see what it is that you really do. Or you're not going to let him see it, and that's going to cause problems for you as well. You're not going to tell him that you saw 10 clients this week. You're going to tell him that you only saw 2. You're not going to tell him that you spent 3 hours with this client. You're going to say, oh, it was just really quick and we just spoke the whole time, we barely even had sex. All these little lies that will catch up to you in the end. So if you tell him sooner, when you're less involved, you'll be way more able to just be totally honest with him and to the point about it, and you won't have as many of these emotional implications to sort through. Now for him, the reason why it is not helpful to tell him after he's already fallen in love with you or after you've been dating for 6 months is because he will be way too colored by his emotions for you to think rationally about the concept you have presented to him. Now, rational thinking is your friend in this scenario. You need him. You need him to consider the situation rationally before moving forward as best as he is possibly able to. If he is a logical, open-minded person, which is ideally what you're looking for, he will at least at first be able to regard your profession as an acceptable job. So firstly, he'll be able to go through the process of, okay, this is a profession, lots of people do this job, you're exchanging money for a service, just like a doctor does, just like a PT. Firstly, he has to get past that. And then he will need to be able to rationally see how he feels about making a relationship work with you. And it's better that he does that from a rational place. It's better that he can consider the pros and the cons based on his own opinions and his choices and his experiences in a rational state where he's not highly emotionalized. Now, if he tries to do this when he's already too emotionally invested in you, his natural emotional response regarding not just a job, but you, basically his jealousy, his betrayal, his feelings of fear that he's going to lose you, or his fear that you'll be exposed and that he'll be embarrassed, all these other things, that's all going to cloud his ability to do what you need his analytical mind to do. And what you need for him to do is to problem solve and to come to terms with his own thoughts and feelings. And he will do that far better when he is calm and rational and thinking with his analytical mind, not his emotional one. And I see this time and time again where girls decide 6 months in, 1 year in, that they're going to reveal to their partner, and their partner's way too in love with them. They're way too emotional about the whole situation, and they aren't able to come to grips rationally and understand why you decide to do what you did, and understand why you would do this job, and understand why there's nothing wrong with it. All they see is their emotion. It generally ends with it being pretty nasty, and the relationship just ends anyway. So it's also better that he rationally decides against continuing on with you, as is his right and choice, and that you part ways amicably. If you tell him once he's already invested in you, he will feel cheated, betrayed, and he will be far more likely to respond in a way that is hurtful to you, and the relationship will end anyway. So we all have heard those horror stories of partners finding out or being told, and then telling all these other people about what's happened, because they're emotional too. They're only human. And they feel upset about what's happened, they need to vent, they try to hurt you back because you've hurt them. It's not pretty, but it is what happens when you conceal this sort of information from somebody. And just know that if he isn't right for you, it's better that you know that before you invest in him, and you save yourself a lot of time and pain. If he can't wrap his head around it and be accepting of what you do, he isn't right for you anyway. And if he can't do that when it's fresh and he doesn't know you that well, or he's not super invested in you rather, and he's able to be rational about it, then he's not going to be right for you once you are emotionally entangled. If he can't handle it when he's calm, he certainly can't handle it 1 year down the track when you're in love and you've come home from a booking and you can't have sex because your vagina hurts, or you've been texted by a client in the middle of the night and he's seen the dirty messages, or he sees the selfies that you're sending them, or you accidentally run into a client on the street. He's certainly not going to be able to handle any of that if he can't even handle the concept calmly. So better that you just rid yourself of all those problems straight away. And there are plenty of other fish in the sea who will be right for you. I've dated a lot of guys, some that have been serious and some that haven't, and I've had about 4 serious relationships now while being in this job that have all been a year or longer. And there are certainly plenty of guys out there, even people that you wouldn't suspect would be okay with it, will find a way to make it work if you handle it appropriately with them. So I want to give you an insight now into what his perspective is. And this is as thanks to my partner, because we spoke a lot, especially in the beginning, about all this. And I spoke to him again when I wanted to make this video to get a bit of a refresher. Just some things to consider to put yourself in his shoes when he's finding all of this out. So if he doesn't know anything about this world, aside from his pre-programmed societal stigma, he will need to be re-educated. So I had to show my partner through my actions and other case studies that this is a business just like any other, and that it wasn't entirely the world he presumed it to be, which was dodgy, shady, unsafe, criminal, that whole negative bias that people have, the hooker on the street sort of scenario, the movie aspects, the things that they see about sex work. I had to really just educate him to go that, you know what, this is actually just another business that you don't know that much about, and it's reputable just like any others, and I had to really change his thinking on that. Then he'll need to recategorize or get to know you again in his mind. So something that I didn't expect that has happened with anybody who I've told fresh when they haven't known is that they tend to ask me a lot of questions about other parts of my life just to see what is real. So when you start dating a guy especially, and you're talking about things, they develop, kind of imagine this like profile of you. And they think, oh, she likes this, she does this, we have this in common. Now, when you tell them that what you do for work is actually this, especially if you have a cover like I did and it's, you know, something that they get to know as a part of you, they have to re-understand who you are. And again, that's why it's better if you do this sooner, because there will be far less work involved in this. So he wanted to know, do we actually have the things in common that I thought we had in common? Or when you were at the gym, were you not really at the gym? Were you actually seeing a client and you don't really go to the gym? And am I now seeing someone who isn't as interested in this area of life as I thought that she was? Is that just part of her cover? So expect that as well, that he's going to start to try to re-understand who you are, and that's normal, and just be ready to answer those questions. And it's better that you are as much yourself as you can be until you reveal this information. Now, like I said earlier, that even though it was very early that I told him, there was still an emotional part of him that felt betrayed. Even though he understood very easily why I lied, he still felt hurt that we had spent time talking about things that weren't true. And I really had to work through this with him, and I really encourage that you do that. You need to be patient and continue to explain the personal repercussions it would have on you if you were too open about it. And if he values your discretion about what you do, you can show him here why it was even more important and actually better for both of you that you were cautious about who to tell. So if he, and the majority of people will be like this, and I'm not saying everybody, there will certainly be some men who are totally comfortable with being super open about it. But my experience is that less of them are. So if he falls into that category, the majority of that, he prefers that you're more discreet, then you can use this here to be better for both you and him. You can say, hey, look, see how I handled it with you? You can see that I am able to integrate in both worlds very easily and very believably, and I'm able to understand when it's appropriate to talk about my job and when it isn't. And he'll probably really value that. So you can use that to firstly dispel that problem, and also to give him added value as to why you are a great person. He should date you if he's the right one. Also, my partner had said that being able to ask any questions openly was really important for building trust. Now, at first especially, this was true. he asked me a lot of questions, and there were certain things that I was hesitant to tell him. It was actually my partner who taught me that the open honesty approach was the best one. Most partners I had had before him really actively encouraged that we didn't talk about certain things, that they just didn't ask, that we pretended it wasn't there, and that was the worst possible method. It wasn't until I met this man who was like, you know what, it's better that I just know everything now. And if you don't tell me one part, I'm going to question what's really going on, and I'm going to inflate it to be way worse than it is. And if I find out down the track that you lied to me about it, or that something was happening that I didn't know, it's going to be even worse and our relationship will end. So I really have this wonderful man to thank for having that perspective, because I probably wouldn't have handled it like that. I would have been more inclined to hide certain parts that I was scared would push him away. So he said that at first it was even more important in the beginning. So this beginning part, and why I'm making a video about it, is that this is a really pivotal point of how the relationship could go. And it's really important that you handle this really well. So if I had hesitated to share with him information in that trust building period, it would have been even worse for us, because he would have been even more suspicious that there were things going on that I was trying to hide from him that he wouldn't like. So like I said, it was just better that I told him everything straight away, and he could make an informed, rational decision when he wasn't that invested in me. Better that than 6 months down the track I say, you know what, I've actually been lying, I do unprotected oral. And he says to me, well, look, I would never have gone out with you if I knew that you did that, because that's just a non-negotiable for me. And now I found out that firstly, you've been doing it behind my back, and secondly, we're 6 months or 12 months down the road, and I only know now, and now we've wasted our time, or I don't want to leave because we've built a certain life together, and I don't want you to do that anymore, but then you have to decide if you're going to stop doing it. So again, it just creates this way more complicated situation than it needs to be. So just save yourself all that time, energy, and emotion, and be totally honest with them from the start if you're going to go down this path. Now I want to end it here by telling you again that I've had serious relationships with multiple people while working as a professional escort. Some of them have been clients, and others have been men I've met by ordinary means, and all really have presented their own challenges and obstacles. But that's just like any relationship you would have outside of sex work as well. And all of those relationships have been very rewarding, and they've all taught me invaluable lessons. If I hadn't have had some of the disaster relationships before my current one, where I had lied, or I had concealed certain things, or I had been actively encouraged to not tell them about it, then I wouldn't have understood experientially the implications of what that means for a positive relationship, and how that really destroys one and prevents you from building one. So just be sure of who you are and what matters to you, and know the kinds of relationships that you want in your life. If what you want is to have open, honest relationships that are built on trust, then you need to offer that in return. You can't expect something that you're not willing to give. So if that's what you want, then just know that you don't deserve anything less than that, and you shouldn't settle for anything less either. So just like I had to be patient, learn from your mistakes, seek advice from others who can help you. Just know that you aren't alone in this. There are others going through it too, and know that it is possible to have a really great relationship. I really enjoyed speaking about this topic today. Relationships are probably one of my most passionate topics close to my heart. I think that we all deserve to have really positive, beautiful relationships, regardless of what we do for work. So if you want to reach out to me to ask me any further questions about what I've shared with you today, please don't hesitate. You can contact me on isabelle@foxgirls.com.au.